being mindfulness, this practice that we do, is really about paying attention to the things we want to pay attention to, right? It's about choosing. We practice mindfulness to increase our capacity to pay attention to the things that we want to pay attention to. And we notice as we practice, you feel that when you have steady attention, when you're able to maintain a steady attention, your heart and mind feel steady. And vice versa, when your heart and mind are steady because of the conditions of the day, you're more able to pay attention to the things you want to pay attention to. This mode of non-distraction, right? It's the ideal mode to be in. This mode of being able to filter out what we need to filter out. I'll read a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh that inspired me this week. Thich Nhat Hanh writes in The Miracle of Mindfulness, if you want to know your mind, there is only one way: to observe and recognize everything about it. This must be done at all times during your day-to-day life, no less than during the hour of meditation. Observe and recognize everything about your mind. This is something we do in our day-to-day life, in our mindfulness practice. You understand that you can observe your mind best when you're in a state of mindfulness. You can know what's going on inside of you best when you have your attention in the here and now. When you're lost in the stories, when you're lost in the discursive thinking, so to speak, you're like one with it, and you don't have that distance, that perspective. Whereas when you're mindful, that capacity grows exponentially. Rick Hansen in Buddha's Brain, he has a very interesting way to think about attention that's based on science. So he says that developing greater control over your attention is the single most powerful way to reshape your brain and thus your mind. Now, why do we want to reshape our brains? Why are any of us practicing? We practice because we want to reduce our suffering. We want to increase our joy and happiness. And developing greater control over your attention is the single most powerful way to do this. So in Buddha's Brain, he says, so how do he asks the question, how do we pay attention? How does the mind pay attention? How does the brain pay attention? The brain has 3 parts to its attention. There's 3 parts to it, and I'll work through it and then talk about the balancing of that. So the first part is working memory. Number 2 is the updating mechanism. And number 3 is stimulation. So your working memory, the updating mechanism, and stimulation. So working memory. Basically, working memory is your brain keeping specific things in the mental foreground while you perform tasks. And this is whether it's physical tasks, taking care of things in the material world, or whether it's mental tasks, right? We usually have both of those things that we like to do. So your working memory is the brain keeping in the forefront the things that you need to complete these different tasks. He likens it, or someone likens it, to a mental chalkboard. So your brain puts up on the chalkboard what you're going to need for this particular task. For example, making a cheese sandwich for lunch. You get hungry, you want to make a cheese sandwich. Up on the chalkboard, need to get some bread, need to get some cheese, need to get a plate, open the refrigerator, all these different things you need. For example, if you're meditating, you're using your working memory, keeping your breath or your body in the forefront of the mind. Your working memory is all of these things needed. So you can imagine if it's an easy task like making a cheese sandwich, maybe it's not difficult to have the working memory. Like you don't have a lot on the chalkboard, right? You don't need a lot on the chalkboard to make a cheese sandwich. Whereas maybe if you're doing something more complicated or more involved, you need more space. The second thing your mind is doing, so now it's got its task up on the chalkboard, knows what to do, is going to execute. Next thing your brain is going to be doing is updating the information. So your brain is routinely sort of refreshing the chalkboard with new information. For example, you're about to make your cheese sandwich and you have no bread. So you erase that from the chalkboard and now something new comes up like, do I need to go to the store? Do I need to find some crackers? Right? There's this updating function that's constantly happening with the brain. So you have things steady, but when unbeknownst to you, it's constantly being renewed as things change as you move through the task. Again, with meditation, that happens, for example, if you hear a sound and it disturbs you, you're going to analyze, well, what was that sound? Is it something I need to tend to or not? Okay. And then the third part of attention is fascinating, is seeking stimulation. The brain has a built-in desire to seek out stimuli. And this need of our brain is evolutionary. It's very hardwired into the system, and it's our need to seek out new opportunities for food, shelter, and mating. So we have an automatic system that will prevent us from starving to death and dying of exposure. It's a built-in system. We're going to be constantly on the lookout. And the brain is designed such that it gets dopamine rewards when new stimuli come in. We get dopamine rewards. And if you know anything about neurochemistry, dopamine is really good. It makes us feel good. And the need is so great for the brain to have stimulation that in a deprivation chamber, maybe you've heard about these, you're deprived of all five senses. You're floating on a saline, you're floating in a tub of saline water that's perfect, the same temperature as your body. There's no visuals, there's no acousticals. You're in complete sensory deprivation. People like to do this because eventually the mind will start hallucinating. It will create its own stimulation because it really thrives on it, feeds on it, and needs it. Okay? So working memory, the updating function, and this inherent need for stimulation of our attention. And so for the brain to operate well and for us to be balanced, there needs to be a balance in these different functions. And so the brain has a gate, and it's like a protection mechanism, right? Because when you're making your cheese sandwich, if you're constantly distracted by everything that passes through your mind or anything, if you're in a busy place, if you're paying attention to everything, you'll never get to eat. So the brain has a gate, and it closes the gate for you, and it keeps it closed until you've done what you need to do. Gate closed, focus is maintained. When new stimulus knocks on the door, knocks on the gate opens and closes again. The mind takes a look and closes again. If the working memory is imbalanced, it's feeling unstimulated. So you're working away, and the mind is starting to feel dull. I need a little stimulation here. The gate will open up and let some stuff in for you to keep you pepped up. If there's a threat in the area, the gate will definitely open up. And you'll get distracted, right? So the brain is constantly, or the mind is constantly trying to balance these different energies, these different activities as you're doing anything at any point during the day. And Western culture, and especially modern Western culture, especially with the computers and the smartphones. The modern world that we have created for ourselves really does overwhelm and strain the brain. It's sending us more stimuli than we were designed to handle, or that we have evolved yet to handle. Like we have a few million years that our brains have been evolving, and a few 100,000 years that this modern brain has been evolving. And now just in the last, 10 or 20 years, we've really been asked to process a tremendous amount of stimuli. Tremendous. So we're in the midst of something. We have to catch up. Our brain needs to invent ways to try and filter what we have on our plates at the current time. So, of course, I said this I'm a huge believer in modern technology being a bit of a brain eater. But I shared that with a friend of mine who's deep into Dharma, and he shared this funny story with me that made me pause. The story is advice from Dogen, Japan's greatest Zen master. Basically, what he remembered from the story is that a student asked Dogen how someone could possibly meditate when there's something so interesting to do, like making sparks with a flint stone. This is ancient times, right? And somebody had discovered. The student says it might be interesting for old Chinese farmers to meditate, since China is where Buddhism came to Japan from. And he says, but in this modern world where people can make fire, how can you just sit there doing nothing? So maybe it's all relative. I don't know. So the next very, very important thing to understand is that there is neurological diversity within the human race, right? People vary. You are unique. And you have causes and conditions that have made you who you are right now in this moment that are they're utterly unique. Not a single person in existence has ever had the same experiences that you have had that have made you who you are right now. So you have a very unique and special neurological diversity. For example, some people seek stimulation. Some people crave stimulation. Some people prefer quiet. Some people need quiet in order to survive. Some people are very easily distracted. Some people get hyper-focused and forget everything that they're supposed to be parallel processing with, or whatever it is. You know what I mean. Everybody has tendencies based on who they are and where they come from. And this is one of the beautiful things about practicing meditation and mindfulness, is we are on a journey to understand ourselves intimately so that we can care for ourselves in the best possible way. And obviously, as you're on that journey, being judgmental is completely useless. But that would be one of the pitfalls of not getting to know who you are, is being ashamed of your tendencies, right? So if maybe you're you're a hyper-focused person and you forget all the other things you were supposed to have done, and so you feel ashamed of that. Well, that's not really helpful. And it will impede your progress to this personal care that brings real freedom. Similarly, if you ignore your tendencies, you're like, I don't care. Or never challenging. It's the same thing as ignoring, really. I'm going to share on the screen here this chart for you. The results of different tendencies on the 3 aspects of attention. It's kind of a complicated chart, but I want you to focus on the white squares because it gives nice descriptions of the different kinds of people we have. So we have working memory, input, and stimulation. And if you have high capacity, moderate capacity, or low capacity in each of these categories, you end up with, these are some of the qualities that you might run into. So for example, a high working memory, holding on to information, might lead to over-focusing, right? A low working memory could lead to concentration fatigue. Yeah. High need for stimulation can lead to hyperactivity or thrill-seeking. And a low drive for stimulation can lead to stuckness, apathy, or lethargy. These are tendencies, personal tendencies, neurological diversity, rather than understanding. We do try to understand why we are, having these different aspects to our attention. But I think it's more valuable to just know what is. It is what it is. And as soon as we're aware of our tendencies with regards to our attention, the moment you have awareness, you're 70% done with the project. I mean, we're never done with our life's project of seeking freedom, but awareness is the majority of the journey. And we're going to do this in breakouts. We're going to just share with each other where we guess we might stand on some of these tendencies. You don't need to do a whole analysis of yourself, but is there something here that resonates with you? When you look at it, you're like, ooh, yeah, that's me. So before we go to breakouts, I want to just briefly mention some quick ways to increase our attention. They're not quick, they're simple. So 3 ways to increase attention, because again, increasing attention leads to a steady mind and a steady heart. When we can be non-distracted, it's very nourishing. So how do we increase our attention? Number 1, slow down. Get off the treadmill. And sometimes that means slow down physically, and sometimes that means slow down mentally. Slow down. Number 2, set an intention. So when you're about to do something, when you're about to make the cheese sandwich, set your attention. Stay focused, for example, could be a good intention. I'm going to stay focused on whatever I'm doing right now. I'm going to conscientiously keep the gates closed in this low-risk situation and see how that works. I'm going to try and keep out the thoughts of other things while I'm doing this. It's practicing mindfulness, really. And number 3, be kind to yourself. Let go of right and wrong views. This is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad. The self-judgment is harmful action. And you're measuring yourself against 7 billion people, so that's a big project. It's not worth measuring. So letting go of the judgment.